Padres Hot Tub, everybody. Craig Elsten, Chris Reed, Raphie Cantor, special guest Ben Davey from Madfriars.com joining us here. These other two guys are a bunch of goofballs. Ben, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great tonight. It's raining. It's about as sunny as the Padres offseason so far.
You're not kidding. Well, Ben's top 30 Padres prospect list, if you are watching or listening to this on Tuesday, February 6th, it just dropped on madfriars.com. That's going to be the vast bulk of today's podcast. We record this on the night of Monday, February 5th. And let's just state clearly and for the record, if you'd like to go back to our last show where Raphie and I discussed Wandy Peralta, nothing has happened since then. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. No one was signed. Nothing actually occurred. Eric Grupner did an interview on our radio station, 97.3 The Fan. He didn't say anything. I had to spend 2 hours talking about him saying nothing. What I love about Padres Hot Tub is we can just simply say, nothing happened. We'll be back when it does. The only thing that maybe I got from the Grupner interview is that a business guy who should know all the details of how the bricks are going into Gallagher Square or how the sushi has changed this year in the Terrace Club or something like that, instead was name-checking outfielders who just got to Double-A last year in Graham Pauley and Jacob Marsee. So, Ben, that tells me your beat is becoming more relevant than ever, my friend. If Grupner knows these guys, it sounds like they're on the come.
Yeah, it was a surprise to me that when, asking the CEO if we're going to get new outfielders, he name-checked our Double-A, one outfielder and one third baseman who's played a handful of games on left field.
Yikes. So maybe let's just start there. I know by starting there, Ben, we're not starting at the top of your list. We're not starting anywhere close to it. We're kind of around the 10-11 range when we talk about Marsee and Pauley. Is this smoke? Is this kind of like, I'm leaning right now on they can't talk about players they don't have, so they can only talk about players they do have. So they're giving us this stuff about these guys because they do have them. We're not really going to start a Double-A kid in left field, are we?
I mean, I would hope not. But, I mean, it seems like talking about Pauley or Marsee or Jackson Merrill being in the outfield seems like their go-to. And that's probably more to do with, leverage when it comes to trades, right? If you tell people that you have everything you need, it helps out your position than if you're desperate because you have two outfielders on the 40-man roster.
Sure. And they also could be generational talents, one of whom just won MVP of the Arizona Fall League, the prestigious, renowned, legendary Arizona Fall League, where he took on the best that Single A and Double-A around the league can give him. And what was his OPS? 2.7, something like that. I can't remember. Numbers don't mean anything.
In how many games? In how many games was that, Christopher?
Well, it was like at least 15.
Yeah.
I mean, Marsee had a fantastic Arizona Fall League. Like, he won MVP, no question about it. And I think, after the Grupner interview, someone made the comment, like, is he going to hit the cover off the ball in the majors? Probably not. But, is it that hard to assume that he could hit better than a certain center fielder that we've had patrolling center field for the last few years?
No. It's easy to assume that. And Eric Grupner's a businessman, and spring is for hope, which you guys forgot last week. You thought last week was about tip-to-tip efficiency of doomer loving. It's about hope. It's about fresh starts and new beginnings, about seeds popping through the ground. And Eric Grupner knows there are still some of us that like to see little sprouts shoot up through the ground. Just like we saw Luis Campusano, last year, flower into whatever flower he now is. I think that Eric Grupner is smart in a way by getting a few of us the little bit of hope that maybe one of those guys will crack that opening day.
You know, Ben, I'm just going to jump in off of that. We did do a segment today where I looked at all the Arizona Fall League MVPs, and I tried to find all the Arizona Fall League MVPs who made their major league debut the next season, and I came up with Acuna.
Yeah.
That was the one. That was AFL MVP in 2017 and started his career in 2018. Even like Chris Bryant, AFL MVP in 2013, first debuted in 2015, and Nolan Arenado, AFL in 2011, first debuted in 2013. And like, I feel like there isn't a linear direct path from winning that award to debuting in the major leagues the next year.
No, and for most of them, like most of the prospects in Arizona Fall League haven't at least reached AA. They're only allowed to submit a handful of people in high A or lower. I think it's one per team on the Arizona Fall League. So a vast majority of them haven't at least touched AA. And so that's going to be most of your players. So that could mean that you see them make the jump to the majors next year. But a lot of times the people that you see in the Arizona Fall League are either coming off an injury, so they want more time, or they're hitters who have just now reached AA, and so they're probably going to need a few more months. Like last year's winner, 2022, was Heston Kierstad, who is a fantastic prospect and someone that we are really hoping the Padres would trade for. And he still is a top prospect, but the Orioles weren't exactly in a rush to get him to the majors.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Ben, about Marsee's glove, because I think that's the thing I consistently see every evaluator. You know, some people are, higher on him than others in terms of the hit tool, but pretty much everyone, including you and your write-up, are tempering expectations that this guy can actually stick in center field. Am I reading your assessment right? And then also, if he's not a center fielder, what is he?
And I think that is why I have him ranked, 11th, just outside the top 10, is because he's a fine center fielder. Like he can play there in a pinch, but I think he might be just fractionally better than Will Myers, like was as a center fielder, which if that scares you a little bit, might be the thing. Like he gets decent reads, but he doesn't have a great first step. He's been trying to work on it. Same with his routes to the ball. They're good. They're definitely far from great. So he has enough like pure speed that he can make up for a bad first step. And so that's a lot of what we see is him misreading it or getting a bad first step and making up for it because he's got tremendous speed. Marsee does have, plenty of talents that he could stay in center field. It's just how good is he about, getting the breaks off the ball, doing all the things that we took for granted with Trent Grisham. And so if you believe in that, then, there's no reason why he can't stick in center field. If not, he's probably more like a Jose Azocar, like can play any position wherever you need him to fill in type of player.
That's fascinating because one of the things that I heard even my beloved compatriot Ben Higgins say today, once he heard Grupner and he was kind of in defend doom spiral mode, was, well, look, even if he doesn't hit well, like, look who was in center field. He didn't exactly hit the cover off the ball last year. I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to sell me on a player by saying he's going to hit like Trent Grisham, and that's okay, you better tell me he's going to field like Trent Grisham too and run like Trent Grisham, or else I'm really not keen on this comparison all the way. But that's Jacob Marsee. I'm until it happens and he's out there in the outfield and I have to go get my Marsee jersey. I'm going to stay with my chip on this is a pump and dump. We are elevating him to trade him to someone else and let someone else dream upon him. But what about Pauley? I feel like for a team that's dying for left-handed power, that at least Pauley profiles as somebody that if this bat comes through, obviously we're not talking about a defender, but somebody who could actually maybe excite you offensively?
I do. Just to wrap up on Marsee, just real quick, because, that great Grisham comparison. Grisham struck out in nearly 30% of his at-bats last year. Pauley was at 21%. Grisham walked in 13%. Pauley walked in 16%. So he walks more, he strikes out less. And so at the very least, that should give you encouragement. He also hit 286. He had an over 400 on base percentage. So just from an offensive standpoint, Pauley might hold the might hold the advantage. Marsee might hold the advantage.
That's what everybody
That's
wanted. They wanted Grisham, who just hit a little bit more. Now you have Marsee at 11, and yet you rank who Craig just brought up one higher. Why is that?
So Pauley has the power potential that he could be a corner outfielder. He could be someone who he's really good at tapping into his power. And as long as the hit tool is there, which he's shown that his hit tool has been way higher than scouts have evaluated him, like he has that potential where he could be hitting 25 to 30 home runs in an entire season. Last year, he hit 23 home runs over the course of the season, and that was with him moving to 3 different levels. So give him an entire year in the same level, let him get comfortable with the situation, and he can be a 25 to 30 home run hitter. Like he has that power where he could stick in a corner outfield. The question is, how much do you believe in the hit tool? And scouts have been grading it as 40, 45 range, and then he goes out and he hits 321 in Double A last year, 300 in High A, and so what scouts are saying is happening is different from the actual results. And so you might say small sample size in the beginning, and that's what they said after the 2022 campaign when he hit 328 in Lake Elsinore. And they're like, oh, it's just a small sample size fluke. And then he went out and did it again. So at what point are the scouts going to change their tune and say, okay, maybe he does have a legit hit tool? And if you believe in the hit tool, you believe in the power, then the only question is just kind of where does he play and can he play good enough defensively to stay at that position?
Have you guys gotten to talk to both? Oh, sorry, Rafe.
I was just going to ask him. I'm curious. Obviously, like sort of similar to Marsee in that sense. What I've seen from Pauley is like, look, the hit tool is there. It's stronger in Pauley than it is in Marsee, but the glove is still a question mark. And the difference between Marsee and Pauley is that Pauley plays in defensive positions that actually aren't needs for the Padres at all. So he obviously strikes me as a candidate to be converted into an outfielder to try and fill an organizational need. My question for you, Ben, is how, if he does end up sticking at outfield, does that change the evaluation of him as a prospect at all, of saying, oh, when he was playing second base, his bat carried at a 50 future value level, but as an outfielder, maybe it's down to 45, 40 plus. I don't know how that figures. I'm just curious about that.
I don't think so, mainly because immediately the Padres kind of moved him to third base. And he's been primarily a third baseman in the minors. He's gotten games in other positions, but third base has been where he's played most of his games. So the difference in evaluation between third base compared to left field is probably not a huge difference. I think one of the big evaluation issues for him already has just been his glove. And so they already grade his glove as being below average at third. So how much, if he can even play in average left field, that might actually help his evaluation, knowing that he actually has a place where he can perform defensively.
If we have a new Klesko out there, I'm okay. If he can hit like Klesko, I'm fine with him fielding like Klesko. But let me ask about the third guy in that name check group, Ben, from Eric Grubner today, which is, of course, Jackson Merrill. And you and I talked about him on the radio show last week as well. The most advanced hit tool within the Padres organization. I think that's kind of a straight up consensus for Jackson Merrill. Is it good enough to profile as a left fielder?
I guess it depends what you want from a left fielder. If you believe in his power potential, which he's put on considerable muscle in the last year and a half since we first drafted him, then you believe that he's going to be a 20-ish home run hitter, that you can probably see him if he's hitting close to 300, putting up 20 home runs. Then yeah, he could be a completely solid left fielder. Would that look better as a second baseman or shortstop? Definitely. But we also have, some people that we decided to sign to long-term contracts that are blocking that route for right now. But I do find it interesting that in the Schilt interview that he gave on Friday, he still talked about Merrill being a shortstop. which I think was an interesting point.
I'm curious, just, looking at your list, which, by the way, everyone should go to madfriars.com, check it out. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, February 6th, the list should be up by now. You decided to rank, I think against what most other evaluators, Merrill over Salas. And I'm curious if you could just talk about, like, going into that decision, like why you put him in your list over Salas. I'm sure that was a very difficult choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely flip a coin. What do you believe in more? I think I already mentioned what Merrill's ceiling is going to be, and that's going to be as someone who it profiles as a solid everyday major leaguer, potential all-star if he's hitting over 300 with 20 home runs. But he's not going to be Tatis, right? At least everything that we've seen, he's got a great hit tool. He's got a lot of skills. But he's not going to be your next Acuna. Salas, I understand why people want to dream on him. Like, you can see Salas and you can see any name if you look at 5 different scout rankings, you'll get 5 different, whether he looks like Buster Posey or JT Realmuto or any other like perennial all-star type of catcher, they give that ranking to Salas. The issue that I have and what gave Merrill the edge is that Salas had one good month in low A. Like, he had one good month, and then they promoted him to high A. He was in high A, where he didn't hit much for about a week and a half, and they promoted him to double A, where he was there for a week and a half, and then had a minor injury, and they just decided to shut him down. So and that's not to say that I don't believe in him, because I think Salas has tremendous abilities, and everything is way beyond like how he is. The question is just, he's done it in a month. Like, if we see a month's sample size for most players, we don't say that's enough to like rewrite the rule books or prospect rankings over. And so we're giving him all of this stuff after 1 month. And so it's just to temper expectations, because us at Madfriars, we keep on getting asked, so is Salas going to make his major league debut this year? We're like, he is 17. Like, we're not even 100%. I'm not 100% sure what he does if he has to live with his parents or anything, because of the fact that he's not 18 yet. Like, I am not 100% sure. So the idea that he's ready to make his major league debut when he's had less than 20 games above low A. Like, we talk about Merrill and Pauley and Marsee not being ready, and they've had a couple months in double A. Well, imagine having to less than 20 games above low A, above Lake Elsinore. Like, he's got a long way to go. And so my rationale for ranking Merrill is Salas's ceiling is so high. Like, it is ridiculously high, but I want to see it. I want to see it over an entire season. I want to see him be healthy. And I think if he is, there's no reason why he won't be one of the top 5 prospects in all of baseball next year.
Well, I remember when Craig and I went and saw him at Lake Elsinore, we ran into Bryce Miller of the UT, and I tried to get Bryce to answer if Ethan was going to any high school classes, in the area. And he was like, he just got $5 million to play baseball as a 16-year-old. So he has to worry about that. So these are outfielders that we're talking about, because the Padres have nobody playing outfield right now, could in a world find themselves, out there near opening day. Jackson Merrill is number 1. What would concern you more is if it were number 1 Jackson Merrill or number 30 our guy Terso Ornelas?
I mean, I think I would rather see Tirso getting a shot, just because he's been with the Padres organization. He's had, multiple years at double A or higher. Like, he's put in his time. Like, we can definitely say
he's won a Mexican League batting title.
And if we wanted to take a flyer, put him on the 40-man, see what he does, give him a couple of months, and then if he's performing, awesome. If not, at this point, it's not as big of a loss as he would have been a few years ago. Then, as Raphie said, call these people up just to get rid of them. I know you're talking about pitchers, but like, we can have that same strategy while we get ready for, Marsee or Pauley or whoever's going to be ready by June. And you can try it with Tirso, and hopefully he really, like, 2023 was his best year. And so if you want to buy into the Tirso hype again, like, board that train and hope that his numbers weren't just because El Paso is the moon.
I mean, I would much rather us blow a couple $4 million on somebody who's got some big league ABs and roll his ass out to the corner outfield while we allow these players to flourish and grow and germinate in the minor leagues. I just don't know. I just don't know if we have that or if all of the money has gone into Gallagher Square. I'm not 100% positive, Ben, one way or another. What I do know is that 1 year from now or 1 year ago to today, the outlook for the pitching side of this organization seems to have really, really turned a corner. I felt like a year ago today, we were talking, well, yeah, Lesko's out there and maybe Snelling and maybe someone else out there in the group. And now it really does kind of feel to me like even if things kind of go completely sideways in the 4th and 5th starter spots for San Diego, that come August, we're going to have a lot of guys potentially to call up.
I agree. I think that might be one of the reasons why you aren't seeing a major league signing. I mean, just like you mentioned, I personally would rather them sign a Jacob Junis who just signed with the Brewers, or anybody to fill those spots. But, they have Brito, who's in his second year. They have Vasquez, who's still prospect eligible. They have the Waldron Cauldron. And it might make a difference. I feel like Kyle Higashioka can actually catch the knuckleball. And so, having Waldron throw his knuckle 80% of the time instead of 8 times in an entire game, how much of a difference does that make? Right. And so I think they're Avila and, signing Luis Patino. So I think you might see these guys up in the beginning. So that way they're just buying time until Snelling, Lesko, Thorpe, Iriarte, any of these guys are ready.
Gentlemen, this is where you ask questions.
Well, I guess it would. I just have to, if I'm gonna spit game about any of these guys, I gotta dig into Ryan Bergert a little bit. I mean, this is a guy who has elite college baseball experience, and we've seen a lot of dudes quickly get from that level of competition to the big leagues. Obviously not the flashiest tools. He's not lighting up the radar gun. I think what do you have him at? I think he gets up to like 94, right? 95. But
yeah, he tops out at 96, but usually sits 91, 94, very similar to Thorpe.
Yeah, so but that seems like a guy who at least could, throw strikes. He did fine last year. He wasn't, runner-up minor league pitcher of the year like Robby Snelling. But you talk a lot about not wanting to rush guys from a developmental standpoint and do long-term damage, which is why you don't want to see Marsee up or Pauley or Jackson Merrill. I know you've talked to a lot of these pitchers. Is there any one of them, perhaps Bergert, who stands up from a mental standpoint, who can, face the bright lights and maybe not quite have the Ryan Weathers effect? I know that was an extreme case of the guy being rushed up to the playoffs and then not living up to promise following that. Is there a guy in that list of Bergert, Iriarte, Mazer that fits that makeup?
I mean, usually in that case, we're looking at college pitchers. So Ryan Bergert, like he went to West Virginia. He had a good college career until he had Tommy John in 2020. So that definitely, was a hindrance. And so that's one of the reasons why he fell to the 6th round with the Padres in 2021, is because of that thing. And the Padres don't seem to shy away from pitchers who end up getting Tommy John, and they see them fall, and then they draft them right away. So, I mean, we saw that with Cal Quantrill. We saw that with Dylan Lesko. Like it's a common occurrence that we tend to see. So Bergert, I definitely think could be that type of pitcher that just goes in, does his stuff. Adam Mazer is probably the other one who was pitching in the College World Series, recently. He definitely burst onto the scene. He can handle everything. Both Bergert and Mazer are very good pitchability pitchers. Like, they know how to work the game. They do their homework. They know how to work hitters. I'm not saying the other ones don't, just they've been doing it for longer. They're older prospects, as in they're in their, 22, 23 season. And, they might be those first calls that you see, before we see Snelling or a few of the other ones.
Yeah, I had a question about, you mentioned in your write-up both Mazur. You mentioned in your write-up that Mazur was moved to the bullpen a little bit towards the end of last season, and then also Iriarte, I know, was moved to the bullpen at some point. I know sometimes teams do that as an inning-saving method, but is there any other reason these guys were getting looks in the bullpen? Is that something the team is seriously considering, or do they really see these guys as starters?
I think they want to see them as starters, but both of them have their own reasons why they were worried and tried them out in the bullpen. I don't want to. They've never actually confirmed a reason why they did it, but there's speculation. Like for Mazur, he was throwing 98 in Iowa and was throwing 98 at the beginning of the season, and by mid to late season, by the time he got called up to Double-A San Antonio, he was sitting closer to 93, 94. And so the thought was, if they put him in the bullpen, tell him to go just one time through the order, would we see that 98 again? And they saw a little bit of an uptick, but they weren't seeing that upper 90s fastball that they were seeing at the beginning of the year. And so eventually they just scratched it, put him back in the rotation, and he performed, just as well as he had, which is, a solid mid to late rotation type of starter. He has an above average fastball at times. He's got a good slider, decent change. He's got good command, right? It's just a matter of, putting it all together. But in his case, it's just a question of, if he's throwing 98 from the mound to go with a slider and a good change, he's a, top 2 or 3 type of pitcher. If he can't hold 98 throughout an entire season, then maybe it's better to put him in the bullpen where, maybe only pitching 80 innings a year or 70 innings instead of 130 plus innings, hopefully closer to 200, can he keep it? And so that's Mazur's big question that we're still not 100% sure of. For Iriarte, he's like, stuff-wise, he's probably right behind Lesko as best pure stuff in any of our rankings. He's got a lot of stuff. He was added to the 40-man, which should give you, reason for optimism. He's got a plus fastball, plus slider, plus changeup. Like, he's got that entire package of someone that we could easily see being, a long-term starter in the Padres rotation. He's got the strikeout numbers. He's got everything. The biggest question, though, is his durability. Hasn't thrown more than 91 innings in any season. And he's been in the Padres he's been with the Padres since he signed in 2018, I believe. So, this is now his, 6th, 7th year not counting 2020 because there wasn't a season, but, we're now talking 6 years later and he's topped out at 90 innings. And so, what do you do if you think that there might be a cap on him? Do you try to move him to the pen? Do you, look at the one time through the order thing? Do you leave him as a starter and think that, now that it's been a few years, he can develop? But he has the whole package. It's just a matter of that walk rate that's been, up to about 4.5 walks per 9. Just definitely not where you want from a starter. But if you think you can get it down even to the 3s, like we saw the success that Blake Snell can have.
Is that dependability is what keeps him below Mazur on your rankings?
Yes. Just the idea that, if he can't throw more than 90, then he's probably a reliever. And, if he can't harness his control, how many people have we seen come up to the majors, walk everybody? Doesn't matter that they're throwing 98 and they have a wicked slider. They can't find the plate. That's the downside.
My guy I wanted to ask you about is Drew Thorpe, because I feel like he's kind of an opposite to Iriarte in terms of, no, he doesn't have the wicked slider. He's not going to have the fastball that's going to get any scout, particularly super jazzed, but he's got this changeup that is just a plus pitch. That is one that makes his fastball look better, one that he can play off on, and you can easily see it project to the big leagues. He threw a lot of innings last year in minor league baseball, so his body should be ready for a big league trial. And The guy I was kind of wondering about, Ben, when I was kind of thinking about Drew Thorpe, was Marco Estrada, former starter for the Milwaukee Brewers, went on to the Toronto Blue Jays, was a one-time All-Star, but was a guy who just kind of had an okay fastball, but had that great changeup. And he wound up pitching over 1,200 innings in his big league career of pretty decent baseball. And is that a reasonable comp for Drew Thorpe?
Yes. I can. I was trying to remember Marco Estrada. Like I totally forgot he had been in the big leagues for 11 years. Wow. Yeah, I think it's more of a matter of what do you believe in from him. Because he spent a majority of his time in high A, a little bit of time in double A, and the sabermetric analytical stuff to his game is going to be the difference between a Marco Estrada who has a 12-year big league career and, someone who ends up going to the pen because they only have one really good pitch. And I think that's the biggest question with Thorpe, is that if his changeup is elite and his slider is pretty good, but as we know in baseball, everything's built off the fastball. And when you're only throwing in the low 90s, is that going to be enough? We've heard from some scouts that say he's got tremendous vertical break on his fastball, and he's got movement, and that 91, 92 mile an hour fastball plays up and can really keep hitters off balance with the changeup. And we've heard other scouts, like we just saw from Keith Law, not even rank him in the top 100 because they think that at the upper levels, what low 90s fastball is just going to be, they're just going to sit on it and destroy it and just wait out the changeup.
And that's not going to serve him very well in the Padres farm system where AAA, the level he's, ostensibly going to be at is played in El Paso.
Yeah, I mean, usually we see a huge difference with like curveballs and stuff in El Paso. And his biggest thing is his change.
Yeah.
So he might be okay, but I would also venture to take a guess that a majority of are the elite starters are either going to be in Lake Elsinore, like Lesko, or they'll be in Double A. Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily an urgency to put the best starters in Triple A.
Well, that leads. Go ahead, Raphie.
I was going to completely derail us. Please, Chris, go ahead. And then
I was completely going to derail us. So you got your brick on the track first.
Okay.
Let's see which way your compartment
I was just curious,
goes.
as someone who knows very little about this stuff. Like I rarely see the value in seeing what pitchers have at El Paso at our system because it's such a suck in terms of elevation. And I was just curious as someone who pays more attention to these things, like, is that like a way over exaggeration, or are you kind of in agreement in the sense that like having pitchers go to El Paso doesn't give us a ton of information?
I think it does give us a lot of information. The question is just like, as just a normal fan, it's hard to necessarily understand that information, right? Like when a 4.5 ERA in El Paso is actually really good, when there's usually about 15 runs scored per game, and so like it just because a certain pitcher might give up 2 home runs. The actual StatCast data would have shown that neither of those would have been home runs in any big league ballpark. And so from a pure outcome standpoint, we might look at it and say, oh man, this person had a really bad outing. But the Padres and Niebla and everyone might look at it as like, wow, this pitcher, like he didn't walk anybody. He faced like big league hitters. He did all these things correct. And I think one of the benefits for pitchers in El Paso is that a majority of the hitters that they face are either former big league players or they're players who are, on the cusp of getting there, or they're 4A players like Cody Decker and guys who just put up these tremendous numbers at AAA. And so as a pitcher, how do you handle these guys who have had major league at-bats? They're really good players. Not to diss Cody Decker. I love his podcast and everything. It's just like, how do you, as a pitcher, how do you handle that sort of stuff? And I think that mental aspect to it is something that you don't necessarily get as much in Double A, where you can get away with some mistakes because a lot of the Double A ballparks are older, they're more pitcher friendly, and there's a lot of mistakes you can get away with. And so I think it just depends on the mental game that they're worried if they're worried about it. But they could put someone like Mazer or Bergert at AAA and know that they'll probably be fine, even if the numbers aren't as great as they would be in AA.
Now, my brick was also about AAA, but more like a storyline of the Padres offseason. Because back in November, Dennis Lin came out with a piece saying that the Padres were going to hire a guy who had never managed a game in his life at any level to manage AAA El Paso, ostensibly the best team in their farm system. Mike Daly, who worked with A.J. Preller in Texas, came over when Chris Young moved over to Texas 2 years ago. Mike Daly came to San Diego to become our assistant farm director. It turns out this week he will not be managing AAA, but rather will be going to High A Fort Wayne. That seems like a big switch. It seems just kind of bizarre to have had one thing come out, hear nothing about it for months and months and months, and then 10, 15 days before spring training, it's a completely different story than we thought. I'm just curious what you think about this. Like, what does this mean for the franchise? Does this mean that the team thinks that they want their assistant farm director, who knows these guys as good as anyone, keeping an eye on the younger guys because that's where they think the most promise is, the guys that are farther away that won't contribute this year? And they wound up promoting Lake Elsinore manager to AAA, a guy who has won consistently with the Storm. They won their championship not this past year, but the year before, 2022. I'm just curious what you think that means for the organization.
I mean, I think this is what happens when there's absolutely no moves in the winter, and we're grasping at straws to come up with storylines that are there. The couple times I've talked to Mike Daly, he seems like a super nice guy. Everything that we've heard about him is that he's a good mind. Texas really liked him. He was really good friends with AJ, and he's been one of the assistant scouting directors and one of the higher up people in the organization for a few years. I listened to his Fort Wayne press conference that he gave last week, and he made it sound like he's just really wanted to actually be a manager, be behind the scenes. He's been one of those people that just go to AA, go to High A for a week at a time and work with prospects. And he wanted that time to really get to know players. And maybe AAA was where they were originally going to put him, and then maybe they did an about face and realized most of our prospects are going to be in either AA or High A, and High A worked out better for whatever reason. And the no manager experience, I don't think is necessarily a big thing. How many former players just become a bench coach, become a coach of some degree? He's been within the organization in some Major League Baseball organization for the last 2 decades. So it's not like he's brand new to minor league baseball. He doesn't know anything about baseball. He played in LSU, and then since then he's been I'm going to be helping sign players and in the minor league development phase. So he definitely has his experience.
Sure. The Guardians just hired Stephen Vogt as their manager, a guy who played in the big leagues until, 13, 14 months ago.
Yeah.
Anchored my 2014 Stratomatic team to a championship behind the plate. We'll always love Stephen Vogt. Ben, we talked at the beginning of this interview, Marsee, Pauley, Merrill, 3 players coming up, position players that we could see on the Padres big league roster this year. Is there another position player in the Padres system that you think will appear or could appear on the Padres in 2024?
Besides mentioning Tirso, who, could be given a shot just because he's been around for a long time and is in AAA.
He's old now.
He's depressingly young compared to the rest of us. But I think other than that, most of the other position players that we would see is mainly due to injury. Someone like Marcos Castañon has been pretty fantastic everywhere he's gone. Like, he just continues to hit. He hits. He plays whatever position that gets asked. You want him to go to second base, third base, first base, outfield, DH. He will pretty much do everything except catch. And he's someone who just keeps on putting up numbers. He'll more than likely be in AAA to start the season, but he's more of that Brandon Dixon, Matthew Batten, Ty France type of player who, if he gets a regular job, like everyday job, maybe he can put up numbers similar to Ty France. But, the question is, as a predominantly infielder, with all the infielders that we have, will that opportunity come about? And that, probably not. I guess the only other one we can mention is Aggie, but I guess that depends on your classification, because Aggie's already in the majors and he put up 1.2 WAR last year. I think similar to a lot of other people, the question is just, will he get playing time? He was the first person ever in El Paso to have a 2020 season. So he has power, he has speed,
Wow.
he has all the abilities. He switched to short when he accidentally injured CJ Abrams, and it was just a unfortunate coming together, and moved over to short when he got injured and put up a fantastic season in AA that year. Has done nothing but hit in 2022. And if it wasn't for a weird injury at the last year in the offseason, he probably would have spent the entire year with the Padres and probably would have been a 2 to 3 WAR player. And I think for him, it's just, will he get that opportunity? But he's someone else that you can just slot in. If, something happened and Kim was starting at second, he could play third, or he could play second, he could play short. He's another person that could play anywhere on the diamond, wherever you need him to play.
Has he played outfield?
That one I don't know. Because as we know, we have so many outfielders. We just collect them all.
Ben, one guy on your list who I was kind of surprised to see down where he was, just in the way that some other people talk about him, is Nathan Martorella, first baseman. You have him at number 17 on your list, at least in the version of the list that I have. And I think that there's a very reasonable amount of skepticism there, and I'm just curious if you could talk about why Nathan Martorella is where he is.
Yes. No, he's played first base, shortstop, second base, third base. Sorry, no outfield. For Martorella, it's more of, we talk about Pauley not necessarily having one position, but Pauley can play second, third, first, left field. He's kind of done it all. Martorella is a first baseman, and a first baseman has to either hit really well or, their ranking, they come and go. Like, there's not many other places for him to move. And that tends to be Martorella's crutch, is that he's a solid first baseman. Like, he's not horrible defensively, but if he doesn't hit enough to be an everyday first baseman offensively, then where does he play? What does he do? And I think what gave us a pause is that when he was promoted to AA, he was, well, actually, before that, like at the All-Star break, he was tearing it up in Fort Wayne. And then since that All-Star break, his power just disappeared. Like, I think he hit something like 13, 14 home runs before the All-Star break. And after that, hit a combined like 5. And so the question ended up being, like, what happened? Like, where did that power go? What's going on? And if you believe he's someone that can consistently hit in that upper range power wise, then he's someone that you could possibly slot in as that everyday first baseman. He had a solid year last year. He hit 255, 361, he had a 798 OPS. But as a first baseman, you want better than a 798 OPS, right? Like, you want that person that's hitting 850. You want that person that's really hitting for power. And for me, I'm just a little bit slightly more pessimistic than most about his ability to actually perform at higher levels.
Well, you do want it, but he is a left-handed hitter, and they don't have a DH either, and they're really scraping all the bottom of the bourbon barrel, so to speak. But he is young. I mean, he's like 22 years old, so there seems to be other guys ahead of him, and you also in your list as you go over, you tend to rank guys higher based on what did they call it on Fangraphs? Eminence.
Yes.
His eminence.
I think it is interesting to note, not to say anything bad about Martorella, but the Padres were fairly desperate for, infielders and, or for first baseman, DH, outfielders, left-handed bats. And Martorella is not one of the non-roster invitees, which definitely sent up some flags, around Padres Twitter about, why wasn't he when Nate Mondu and Tyler Wade and Castagnon and McCoy, all these people are getting invites.
Wait, did you say Taylor Wade?
Tyler Wade.
Oh, that's very different.
Slightly different player.
Ben, just a couple other questions. I really appreciate you staying up with us tonight. One guy we haven't talked about yet is Snelling. I've seen people say he could be a number 3 starter in the big leagues. I've heard people say he could be a 6th inning reliever in the major leagues. What's the differentiator that sinks or swims for Robby Snelling?
I think for Snelling, it's just that none of his pitches have graded like I personally would necessarily see as like that plus strikeout pitch, swing and miss. He's one of those players that does everything well. Like his fastball, solid. His slider, solid. His changeup, solid. Right? Like he does all the things that you want to see. He's also a former linebacker. He had a D1 scholarship that he walked away from to sign with the Padres. Like he has that kind of linebacker mentality on the mound where he just comes after you. Like he is someone that, is not afraid to pitch inside. He can locate all of his pitches. He does the little things well. But I think the reason why you see him, at least why I have him ranked lower than Lesko, is because Lesko has these plus wipeout, strikeout pitches, and Snelling just he can locate all of his pitches, and all of his pitches are major league quality. And I think that the differentiating there is, okay, well, is having 3 major league quality pitches, is that good enough to be a number 3 starter? Or is that, more of that like Nick Martinez 5th inning or 5th starter / long reliever, maybe high end reliever role? I personally think he's more of that back end rotation type of player, but that's why I think we see that differentiating different opinions.
Do these guys have access at the lower levels of the minors to the type of equipment that can have them find, that knockout pitch? Like Robby Snelling's coming to camp and he's going to work with Ruben Niebla and he's going to have access to this stuff. Like, is there wish casting to be had there that it could develop just with a little time with the maestro?
Well, yeah. And I think that's those people who think he can develop into that higher end number 2 or 3 starter is seeing that like, okay, well, these pitches are already major league quality. What if they do get better and it goes from a major league quality pitch to a dominant pitch? And yes, they do have access to TrackMan and all that good stuff in the lower level minors. The part of it is that there's not necessarily 50 Ruben Nieblas at every level just going to help out everybody, right? There's a reason why he's working with the major leaguers. And while hopefully the Padres hire really quality guys, and it's great that you can have the data, but just because you have data that says you could improve your RPM by 200 doesn't mean that there's necessarily someone there to help them improve their RPMs by 200. And I think that might be one of those things that hopefully Niebla and the Padres brass have really been working on him. And already we've seen a jump. Like if you look at Fangraph's last evaluation of him, like it's not good. Like Fangraphs was not very high on him coming into this year. And a lot of that has definitely changed. And that is a credit to the Padres. The Padres have done a lot of work with him where, his command, according to Fangraphs, was at 20 back then. And, then he went out and walked 2.86 per 9 in high A, and even less than that when he was in Lake Elsinore. And so, Like over the span of 18 starts, he showed that walks weren't necessarily an issue. And that is the Padres helping him. Now, can he continue to improve? Well, that is our wish casting. That is that other stuff that we hope he can.
Got
But,
it.
we also hope that every player can improve to their max potential. And, that forecasting of who will and who might not, that's why, prospect rankings are what they are. Educated guesses.
One guy who we obviously have talked about, Thorpe and him coming over in the Soto trade. Randy Vasquez lands at 16 on your list. And I think obviously if you're traded for Juan Soto, that comes with a certain amount of expectations, and I think that Vasquez landing at 16 is just kind of a healthy reminder of where he's at, but that doesn't mean he can't contribute to the team. I'm just curious, like, where you see Randy Vasquez this year for the Padres.
I think I'm trying to think of, you could see him in that late inning reliever role. You could also see him in trying to be the next Seth Lugo. He has that one fantastic pitch. He's got a 3,100 plus RPM curveball, very similar to Seth Lugo. And Lugo used that one super strong pitch to, get a great contract from the Royals. And he was a fantastic pitcher for us last year. And I don't see any reason why with Niebla, Vasquez can't become Seth Lugo 2.0 for us this year. He's got the pitch, he's got the RPM, he's got the things needed for the success. The question is just, can he duplicate it? Can he continue it? And a lot of the reasons why people are sour on him is because of his xFIP. Even though he had a 2.87 ERA with the Yankees, his xERA, xFIP were all pretty bad. But a lot of that is Yankee Stadium, right? Yankee Stadium, most major league players, I'm going to say most people because I definitely couldn't, most major league players could hit a home run at Yankee Stadium with that short porch. And putting him in a more pitcher-friendly ballpark with Ruben Niebla, with that one great 3,000 plus RPM pitch, he can either be Seth Lugo with the Mets, where he was that multi-inning Swiss Army knife type of player, or he could slot into the back of the rotation, being that 5-6 inning starter who, like you've said on your great pods above replacements, is great 2 times through the order, and then bring on the bullpen. Don't let him go a third time.
Last question for me, Ben, because you put out, again, a very comprehensive list ranking your top 30 Padres prospects. Obviously, most prospect lists, people are talking about just who gets to the Baseball America top 100 or, top 10. So, speculative question for you, from me on the way out. And then if the boys have anything else for you, fire away. But who on your list, I know you did talk about Castañon, who on your list 21 through 30 with the right kind of year could pop through and be a top 15 guy on this rankings list next year?
I mean, looking at it, top 15 isn't necessarily a hard breach if you think that, unfortunately, some of our fantastic outfielders are going to make the jump. That was in quotation marks. Outfielders are going to make the jump to the majors, so they lose prospect eligibility. Because I could see a world where, a vast majority of our top 15 prospects are still prospect eligible next year. I can also see a realm that continues this bright, sunny off season, where 5, 6, 7 players lose prospect eligibility because they're just needed on the major league roster. So I think there's a lot of fluctuation based off of what happens the next month and a half. But just to give you some names, the Jagger Haynes, who is someone that we got in that last round of 2020, he was there wasn't much known about him. And then, within
why was that year? Was there weird things happening that year?
No, nothing happened in 2020 that might have made scouting reports difficult. When pitchers weren't pitching, and then before he even really threw a professional pitch, he underwent Tommy John. And so he's still finally recovering from it, but he's a lefty that throws in the upper 90s. Just those two words, lefty upper
Yeah.
90s, is usually enough to get people to pay attention to him. So he was signed as an 18-year-old. Like, even though he's been with the Padres since 2020, he's still pretty young. And giving him a full season, he might be in Fort Wayne with your boy Mike Daly. That, give him that full season, and we could definitely see a jump from him. There's also two big catchers, and big as in like, Lamar King Jr., former son, or his dad played in the majors. He has that pedigree. He has that build of just like that big burly catcher that you can see hitting 20 home runs, and he's got the makeup to be a fantastic player. The question is, when he came to the Padres, he was extremely raw, and so the Padres have really been working on his catching ability, working on his pitch recognition, all the stuff that to turn him into the prospect that he could be. He did, in a short 21 game sample size last year, he hit 324, 440, 397. So I mean, like, the talent is there. It's just a matter of putting it all together over an entire season. And then I guess the rest of the guys that you see are all prospects that were just drafted, like Cannon Kemp. Could easily be someone that jumps up. We don't know much about him, other than the fact
we
that
know he's got an amazing name, Cannon Kemp.
80 grade name. Yeah.
80.
It is. He's a 6'6", 225 guy that as an 18-year-old was sitting in the mid 90s. So, and the reports that I heard were that, he's getting up to 98, 99 on the mound, and put him as a starter, put him with Niebla and company. Obviously there's a lot more people than Niebla. He's just the face, and he, is one of our wonderful puppet masters that helps guide all of the minor league coaches. But give Kemp an entire year throwing in the mid 90s, upper 90s, with our guys. And if they can turn Snelling and to being a top 100 prospect, why can't they do that with Kemp? Like, he's got the skill set, he's got the stuff. I think it's just a matter of putting it all together.
Right on. I have one last question, and it's just purely wish casting. When we drafted Kevin Kopps, and I thought, like, okay, this is the Golden Spikes winner. Like, I imagine that he literally gets to wear golden spikes, like how Jake Peavy wore his gold glove when he played with the Savannah Bananas. Like that. Could you imagine that trotting out of the bullpen, like coming into Petco Park? Like, that would be sick. However, doesn't seem like I'm going to see it anytime soon. Is there any hope that Kevin Kopps ends up on the Padres?
No, it's not an anytime soon. It was just, when I talked to Kevin Kopps last year, he mentioned that the biggest struggle that he had was in college. His pitch was so good that he could throw it and no one would hit it. And so it didn't matter where he located it. It didn't matter any other pitches. He just threw it and knew no one was going to touch it. And he got to even the lower minors, he could throw it. Not a big deal. He got to AA, and all of a sudden, if he wasn't throwing it for a strike, hitters were laying off of it. And he started to realize that hitters were keying in on other pitches because they didn't think he could throw it for a strike enough. And so while that pitch is still his like slurve type of ball is still elite, like it generates a ton of swing and misses. They call it a gyro ball type of pitch that they like to call. But his fastball, everything plays off his fastball and changeup. And if they can just sit on his fastball and ignore the gyro ball, no matter how crazy it looks, then like that has limited his progress. And so he's done a lot of like growing as a pitcher, starting to actually have to learn the game. Like, oh, okay, I have to throw other pitches. And he's done tremendous. He's made a lot of strides. Like he's got the pedigree, he's got the pitch where, you could see him put everything together and be a wipeout late inning guy, because that pitch it could strike out Ohtani today. But he's also someone that if he can't locate the rest of his pitches, or they could sit on something that's not his gyro ball, then he could, struggle to make it out of AA.
Ben, great stuff. Really informative interview. Appreciate the time that you've given us. here. Appreciate the time you gave me last week on the radio station as well. Always love to see you in the Discord, above and beyond everything else. And that's where we'll continue to interact over and over. But I really appreciate you sharing so much with the listeners today. And hey, listen, as soon as the Padres do something this week, which I'm convinced they're going to do, likely sign a 4th or 5th left-handed reliever, then we'll be right here to cover it all for you on Padres Hot Tub. Until then, for Chris and Ben Davey and Raphie, I'm Craig. Thanks so much. Go Padres. To the transaction window, please, now.